Hey guys, it's History Behind the Warrior and welcome to another God of War video. Now, before we get started, I wanted to say quick apologies for the absence recently. Basically, I've been working on the History of Kratos video and, well, that video is turning out to be a lot longer than I expected. Roughly about an hour or so. So from what you can tell, it took a while to write, record, and have it be edited together. In saying that though, it will definitely be worth it, as it shouldn't be releasing too long from now, so please do keep an eye out for that, as it's the biggest project I brought to the channel to date. But before that video is released, we have an interesting topic for today's video. Now here, I wanted to talk a little bit more about the contents of the God of War Ragnarok trailer, and something that I ended up picking up on and wish to expand on. As well as brief, I believe what we see here entails something very interesting for the God of War universe, and how desperate I believe Odin has become in his attempt to avert Ragnarok. Now during the trailer, one of the biggest things that caught my attention is when we saw an enemy be summoned in by the Bifrost to fight Kratos. Initially at first, when I did my trailer breakdown, I regarded to this enemy type as an Asgardian, and I still believe it could be, but I wanted to explore this idea and concept a little more, and it got me wondering in this trailer, is this a living, breathing Asgardian? And if so, why do they look so decrepit and worn down? As this isn't the only enemy type we do see in the trailer. We do see a few of them, and it had me wondering what exactly had happened to them. What happened to the golden warriors of Asgard? Well, I think that this all ties back to Odin as well as Valhalla, which was something heavily mentioned in the last game, and a very important part of Norse mythology. It's also worth mentioning before we jump right into things, that this is a theory at best, but I will be drawing from information established in-game, as well as information we have about Norse mythology itself, to explore and explain what exactly could be going on here in this interpretation of Asgard and Valhalla. So first things first, let's talk about Valhalla itself and why is it so important in Norse mythology. Well, Valhalla is seen as an astral plane that exists within Asgard. It is a place where all great warriors of war would ascend to once they were to die in battle. It was seen as an honorable and true warrior's death to be taken to the halls of Asgard by the Valkyries, who in Norse mythology are perceived as angels, which is of course influenced by Christian culture. Now reaching this level and plane of existence was seen as an honor, because in many's eyes, they were handpicked by Odin in death to become a part of his final chosen army in Ragnarok. As expected, the game draws heavy influence from its source material, but in the God of War universe, it has its own dark and twisted spin on the concept. Here, Valhalla is a shell of its former self, and it's largely due to the influence of the All-Father Odin. Unlike the wise, all-seeing king of the gods and protector of the Nine Realms, Odin here is portrayed as a paranoid, bitter, and demented old god, being aware of Ragnarok and knowing of his destined fate to die in said battle. Odin does everything in his power to avoid the events of Ragnarok and his own death. But little do I think Odin knows how badly he has sown the seeds of his own fate by doing so. So please do allow me to explain how Odin's madness will not only bring on his own end, but that of Asgard and Valhalla. So let's start where all of this stems from. Well, before the events of the first game, the Aesir gods and Vanir gods clashed, with blood being shed on both sides. This conflict would only be halted once Freyja of Vanaheim decided to marry Odin. Together, the two ushered in an era of peace for the realms, and all was doing well and good. But shortly after the birth of their child Balder, the myth and legend of Ragnarok started to drive Odin insane. Having knowledge of the events that would unfold, the fear of it all would take a toll on him, much like Zeus of Olympus, knowing of his death at the hands of one of his children. Odin's paranoia and fear caused a change in him, one that would lead him down a path that was violent and malicious against any that posed a threat against him, no matter how small. It got so out of hand that it eventually dissolved the relationship between Freyja and Odin. Where love once stood was now a clouded and blinded old fool who saw his children as nothing more than soldiers. Odin had become a shell of who he was, and because of this, Freyja would leave him, but not before he could get in one final act of bitterness. The All-Father cursed Freyja and imprisoned her to the confines of Midgard. Along with this, the true slowly sever his ties to her and Vanaheim, he put a curse on the Valkyrie Queen's former guard, having them slowly turn into insane beasts instead of the graceful guardians of the afterlife. To finally capitalize on his fear, Odin orchestrates the mass genocide of the Frost Giants, and then finally recedes into the depths of his throne in Asgard. So he abandons his post to the realms, and this allows chaos to seep to the surface. Now really, let's talk about how problematic this all is, starting with the curse placed on the Valkyries. Now if you aren't too familiar with the Valkyries themselves, allow me to explain how they actually worked, as I've only touched on them very briefly talking about Valhalla. Well, when someone died in Norse mythology, they went to one of two places. The first were the fabled and glorious halls of Valhalla, and the other was Hell, or Helheim. Now the difference between whether or not you went to one or the other was how the individual had died. Once physically dead, it was the Valkyries' job to escort the spirit to one of the two astral planes. Now the Valkyries are not only important in forming Odin's army for Ragnarok, but in the God of War universe, they are pivotal in guiding the dead to the afterlife. But with this curse being placed on them, the Valkyries could not only not do their job, but the dead were not given a true send-off. With the halls of Valhalla cut from the mortal plane, the spirits of the Helheim plane began to spill open, and eventually Hellwalkers would walk amongst the living. With the balance broken, it led to many wondering, where is Odin in all of this? Well, he's hiding in the depths of Asgard and preparing for Ragnarok, having his own children and grandchildren do his dirty work for him. But this would quickly come to bite him in the arse. You see, whilst Odin knows of Ragnarok, he does not know the finer details of every single event unfolding, and I think that if he did, he wouldn't have been so foolish to send out who he did. In traditional Norse mythology, Ragnarok begins when Baldur is killed by Loki with a mistletoe arrow. Of course, a similar situation happens in the 2018 game, but it was more of an accident instead of Loki, well, tricking a blind god to kill Baldur. Rough way to go. Either way, Baldur's death basically marks the start of Ragnarok and Fimbulwinter. And whilst I will say Odin has been successful in altering Ragnarok, it has not been to his favor, because in the tale of Ragnarok, two of the survivors of the event are in fact Magni and Modi, as they would go on to wield Mjolnir and usher in a new age for man. But here, that is completely thrown out of the window, and with Valhalla now gone, the souls of Magni, Modi and Baldur are cast into hell, because at that point in time where Magni is killed, neither Kratos or Atreus have the chisel to enter the Valkyries' chambers. So due to Odin's own foolishness, Odin has lost valuable chips off the table for the oncoming storm and what may be the future of the Norse pantheon. But this still brings up the question at the start of the video: who is the warrior summoned by the Bifrost? Well, there are a few options here, and the first and most obvious one would be that the enemy summoned in is an Asgardian, as that's typically what you would associate with a Bifrost summon. The second option is a normal warrior, possibly from Midgard, that would want to find glory in battle by fighting in the name of Odin, as well it's what the Vikings used to do. They worshipped their god and would happily die in his name. But the most likely one that I think we're going to see here, and you can probably tell where this is going because I've been building up to it the entire time, is that this is a warrior from the halls of Valhalla finally being cast to battle. And with this in mind, it does actually explain why they look somewhat the way they look, because a large majority of people that enter Valhalla will have come from the mortal plane, so in a way they are undead. And whilst optional in the 2018 installment, let's not forget that Kratos and Atreus were tasked with slaying the corrupted Valkyries and freeing them of Odin's curse. So with the curse done, the Valkyries could ascend to the afterlife and pick up where they left off, taking the souls of the damned where they belong to be. And I believe they are successful in accomplishing this. As an important thing I want to point out here is that from actually analyzing the trailer frame by frame, we see no Hellwalkers at all. So the 3-year gap, at least I think it's 3 years, between the 2018 game and Ragnarok has allowed the Valkyries to clear up the mortal plane, and with Fimbulwinter here, the dawn of Ragnarok itself, it looks like Odin is taking the next step in his plan to stop it, starting with the destruction of Kratos and Atreus. So with the Valkyries being mentioned, it does raise the question here of how exactly does Freya fit into the mold? How far is she willing to go in her quest for vengeance against Kratos? Because we all know at this point that she is a former Valkyrie queen, and we do know that she is reclaiming her lost warrior spirit. Well, that is a question for another time. But until then, that has been it for me. I hope you guys have enjoyed this one and learnt more by doing so. This was actually really fun for me to have a deep dive into, and that's largely because the world of God of War lays out such an interesting foundation to work with and build on. And since the universe is loosely based on Norse mythology, it makes it really fun to thread and weave the ideas we can pull from the source material into this very twisted interpretation of the Norse pantheon. Plus, it is a great recap to get familiar with Norse mythology, as there's a lot going on here, and even I myself forgot the grand purpose of Valhalla. Now, with this said, what do you think of this whole Valhalla situation? Who do you think this warrior is? Do you think it's a warrior of Asgard, or one that has been residing in the halls of Valhalla? And with the afterlife being a heavy focus of this video, do you think it's possible to see characters like Balder or Magni return back from the dead? Please do comment down below. Also, huge heads up once again, a quick reminder that the History of Kratos video is currently in the pipeline and being edited, so you definitely don't want to miss out for that, as it really is going to be something special, and I'm very excited to see how it's going to turn out. But until then guys, that has been it for me. So before we wrap up here, if possible, let's try getting this video to about 500 likes, and please do not forget to tick that bell and subscribe, as it will keep you up to date with all of my content. But for now, as always, please comment, like, subscribe, and share this video with everyone you know. Please take care, and I will see you all next time.